Well, good evening and welcome to Tucker Carlson Tonight. Donald Trump's presidency is now in its third week, and the battle to push through his agenda is only escalating in its relentless ferocity. Tomorrow, the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals will weigh whether to continue blocking the president's executive order on immigration. We'll discuss that order with Piers Morgan in just a minute. But first, with each passing day, the war between the press and the president grows more intense. Today, the president tweeted this: "The failing New York Times writes total fiction concerning me. They have gotten it wrong for 2 years and now are making up stories and sources." And this morning he tweeted this: "Any negative polls are fake news, just like the CNN, ABC, NBC polls in the election. Sorry, people want border security and extreme vetting." Well, one media outlet with a particularly antagonistic relationship toward the president is CNN, the cable news network, which Trump labeled fake news more than once. Piers Morgan is editor-at-large with DailyMail.com. He's the former face of CNN. And by the way, he won Celebrity Apprentice back when a certain future president was its host. He joins us now from L.A. Piers Morgan, thanks for joining us.
Pleasure. So, that just shows what good judgment he has, right?
Yes, and I always forget that, but what a cool thing to have on your CV. So I remember well when you were the face of CNN. I watched your show a lot. I didn't always agree with you, but I always thought you were straightforward. If you thought something, you just kind of put it out there and said it. So you left 3 years ago. Since then, thanks to WikiLeaks, we've learned a lot of detail about CNN colluding with the Democratic Party during this election. Were you shocked by it?
I was a bit, yeah. I mean, I don't know how directly involved CNN were, but I do know that when you looked at what happened with Donna Brazil and some of the other characters involved, it stank, frankly. And, you know, it brought to light, I think, Donald Trump's main beef with the media, which is that it's a two-way street, this question of respect and honesty. Yeah. And he has felt for quite some time, I think, that a lot of people in the mainstream media, for want of a better phrase, are absolutely determined to bring him down. And I think he's got a point. I think some of them absolutely are. And they were in the tank for Hillary Clinton. Their candidate didn't win. And now they are utterly determined to bring the Trump presidency crashing down. So you have a war between the media and the White House, the like of which I've certainly never seen before. And it's pretty dangerous all round.
So I think there's a difference, though, between having a perspective and stating it clearly, as you do, as I try to, and in a subterranean way that's cloaked from public view, coordinating with the political party. So we learned in WikiLeaks the Donna Brazil story, as you know, where she got the debate questions ahead of time. We also found out that the DNC research director was consulted by CNN for questions to ask Ted Cruz. A Clinton staffer implied that the politics producer at CNN was, quote, a friend and an ally. And then you have the chief political analyst at CNN emailing John Podesta and saying, quote, "You are a TV star. I've been in GOP hell." I mean, it really seems like there is a special connection between CNN, not just all media, but CNN and that party. Did you notice that when you worked there?
Well, to be honest, and to be fair to CNN, you know, I spent 4 years there. I think the vast majority of people that work at CNN, particularly the anchors, do have great integrity, and I don't think they would want to be party to any of this kind of stuff. But I definitely think there were people lower down the food chain, perhaps, who didn't have such scruples and who were absolutely, I think, determined that Trump wouldn't win. And bear in mind that the history of this. From the moment that Donald Trump decided to run, you know, he was, for about 4 or 5 months, the only gig in town. CNN and all the other networks were racing to give him as much airtime as they could possibly give him. This, of course, fueled the monster. And then when the moment came when they thought, oh, God, hang on, he might actually win, then rather like Dr. Frankenstein, they thought, we've got to kill him off. But by then, Trump, the nominee, was gone. He was off and racing around America, and he became unstoppable. And I noticed in the last few months of that campaign, it got more and more virulent. You know, papers like the New York Times, frankly, I thought were a complete disgrace. They weren't even pretending to be anything but in the tank for Hillary Clinton. And I found that as a journalist pretty obscene to watch, actually. So for the New York Times and others now to be saying, oh, poor us, you know, we're the innocent parties here. Donald Trump is annihilating the media and breaking down the First Amendment and so on. It's pretty rich, I think, given the way that they themselves conducted themselves as the supposed paper of record. So I think that there is fault on both sides here. I think that it is dangerous and toxic, and I think that the media have got to start showing President Trump a bit more respect, and he in turn and his White House operation have got to show the media a bit more respect, and they've all got to move on.
Well, it's certainly within bounds, I think, for news organizations to call out politicians on statements that are false. And I think Trump has made a few, and I don't have any problem with reporters saying, whoa, wait a second, prove what you say. But it's the orientation that shocks me. It does seem like a lot of journalists see their role not as to report the news, but as to affect the outcome of an election. Has that changed in the decades you've been in the business?
Yeah, but look, I mean, in Britain, for example, we have a very free press, and you have papers which are very obviously partisan to political parties, be on the left and the right. And it's pretty balanced down the middle. There are as many left-wing papers in Britain as there are right-wing. In America, what I don't like is this pretense from papers like the New York Times that somehow they are completely beyond any reproach when it comes to their coverage, that they are completely neutral. They're not neutral. I remember in the middle of the campaign picking up the New York Times and reading it from cover to cover. There were 11 different stories and letters and comment op-ed pieces about Donald Trump in that one edition of the New York Times. Every single one of them was hostile to Trump, including 4 out of 4 letters. Now, come on, that is not a coincidence. And I think what you're seeing generally here what we're seeing in Britain with the post-Brexit, Britain leaving Europe.
Right.
Now, look, I did not vote Brexit. I voted to stay in Europe. I thought it was a mistake. But I've always been of a firm belief you have a free democratic election in a free democracy, be it the Europe referendum in Britain or be it the US election here. And if somebody wins, they win. You have to accept they have won. You have to stop the squealing, the wailing, the teeth gnashing. And what we're seeing in Britain, just as we're seeing in America, is just one of the great hissy fits of modern political times. And everyone's just got to stop wailing and actually start coming together, as we saw a little bit actually at the Super Bowl, and start putting America before their own self-interests.
Well, I mean, and by America, you mean the basic precept of the country, which is democracy, and the people administering the democracy, at least here and perhaps in Great Britain, they don't really believe in democracy, do they? I mean, the idea that the outcome is legitimate as long as the majority supports it.
Right. I mean, that is the essence of democracy. And I would be more left than right, as I'm sure many of your viewers would have gleaned from my time at CNN. I'm absolutely not a traditional conservative. But I am appalled by the behavior of so many liberals right now. I just think it's so alien to the concept of being a liberal. They bang on about, democracy. They bang on about tolerance, about fairness. And yet they're behaving exactly the same way that they warned us all that Donald Trump and his supporters would behave if and when, as they assumed, he lost. And I just don't think you can do that. I also think, knowing Trump as I've done for 10 years very well, it's completely the wrong way to go about trying to defeat him. If I was on the left, I would surely by now be trying to work out how have we lost to somebody like Donald Trump, who's a non-politician. He wasn't even a guy with any military experience. He's come out of nowhere as a business guy and a TV star, and he's become the president of the United States. How has that happened? And the reality is that for all the fancy talk about Barack Obama being this wonderful president, actually, in the polls before the election, over 70% of Americans said they were unhappy with the direction of the country. And Hillary Clinton was a terrible candidate who offered nothing new, nothing fresh. And I was doing a documentary series around Florida and Texas throughout last year. I spent a lot of time in those states, and I could feel the Trump phenomenon as it was happening in real time. And it really came down to this. They thought that Donald Trump cared about the stuff they actually cared about. And that's how he managed to resonate. And he won. And he won fair and square. So my message to the left is, if you want to try and beat Donald Trump, then do it democratically and stop trying to delegitimize him. Stop trying to make every tweet, every statement, every comment he says the Armageddon of the world, and just try and apply some rational political common sense to defeating your opponent.
We seek that every night on this show. So I think a lot of Americans look to Europe and the UK and they say, it's changed an awful lot in the past 40 years. I know this as a regular visitor to your country and others. And it hasn't gotten better, and part of the reason it hasn't gotten better is because of the immigration policies in Europe. Those countries are more divided, they're more dangerous, they're less happy, and they're poorer. I know you're against the president's executive orders on immigration, but how do we prevent what's happened in the UK and Sweden and Germany and France from happening here?
Well, let me first of all say that I absolutely agree with Donald Trump that the threat from Islamic terrorism is very real and very dangerous. And he's quite right to cite what has happened in Paris twice, in Nice, in Brussels, as examples of where the massive amount of migration through Europe has created a lot of turmoil, a lot of unease, a lot of insecurity amongst the people, because no one's really quite sure who all these people are, where they're coming from, what their motivation is. So Donald Trump is absolutely right, I believe, to want to protect America as his #1 mission statement right now. And he's absolutely right to say that Islamic State presents a real and very dangerous threat to America. And he's absolutely right, thirdly, to look at what's happened in Europe and say, how do we avoid what has happened there, particularly in, say, Germany, with 1 million people being let into the country and then all hell breaking loose? How do we stop that coming to America? Where I disagree with him is just in the implementation of this ban, where it seemed to me perverse to not include countries like Saudi Arabia and Pakistan and Egypt and others, which foment so much terrorism. Also, I didn't like the idea of people with green cards being detained and threatened with deportation.
Well, it was
I didn't like the idea,
and they went back on that pretty quick. But so in just one
so there were things that were wrong about it. But this is the key point. I mean, for all those screaming at Donald Trump, I say to them, well, okay, what's your idea? And the main idea from the left appears to be, we've all got to talk more to the community. Well, that's all fine. That's all fine. But while you're talking, ISIS are right now planning attacks on the British mainland, on the American mainland, and they've got to somehow be stopped. So I think Donald Trump is right in his concern, and he's just, I think, probably slightly wrong in the way he's executed this. But let's not all get so pious that we put the attack on Donald Trump and our hatred of him before the real threat, which is people trying to kill and maim and behead us.
That's a bracing reminder. Piers Morgan, thanks for joining us tonight. Thanks.
Pleasure.
Well, the Trump White House is appealing the court ruling halting its executive order blocking the immigration and travel from 7 majority Muslim countries. The appeal will be heard tomorrow. That's in the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. For more, we go to Fox News correspondent Trace Gallagher with the latest. Trace?
Tucker, a 3-judge panel of the Ninth Circuit Court will hear oral arguments over the phone tomorrow at 3 p.m. Pacific. Each side gets 30 minutes. In its legal brief, the Trump administration contends the president has access to the best intelligence, arguing, quote, the state asked the court to take the extraordinary step of second-guessing a formal national security judgment made by the president himself, pursuant to broad grants of statutory authority. The 3-judge panel, which could rule also as early as tomorrow, includes 2 Democrats considered moderately liberal and a George W. Bush appointee considered moderately conservative. This is the same Ninth Circuit that once ruled the words "one nation under God" should be taken out of the Pledge of Allegiance and also banned nativity scenes from public parks in Southern California. Meantime, during his first official visit to U.S. Central Command, or CENTCOM, at MacDill Air Force Base in Tampa, Florida, President Trump reiterated his disdain for the media and support for the troops, saying he's 100% behind the military in their fight against radical Islamic terrorism. The president also indicated some terror attacks are not being covered by the media. Watch.
All over Europe, it's happening. It's gotten to a point where it's not even being reported. And in many cases, the very, very dishonest press doesn't want to report it. They have their reasons, and you understand that.
The White House offered 78 examples to support the president's claim. We are checking to see if any were not covered. Mr. Trump also dismissed the polls that show his immigration policies are unpopular, calling them fake news, saying instead he relies on his internal numbers. Quote, I call my own shots, largely based on an accumulation of data, and everyone knows it. Some fake news media in order to marginalize lies. And the president is getting pushback from some Republicans for appearing to equate Russian leader Vladimir Putin's morality to the United States. Florida Senator Marco Rubio tweeting, quote, when has a Democratic political activist been poisoned by the GOP or vice versa? We are not the same as Putin. Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell also said, we don't operate like Russia. Tucker.
Trace Gallagher, thanks a lot. President Trump is pushing hard to stamp out sanctuary city policies, saying that cities must either drop these policies or lose federal funding. The mayor of New Orleans, Mitch Landrieu, won't call his city a sanctuary city, but nevertheless, New Orleans has many policies that protect the rights of illegal immigrants. Police cannot inquire about a person's immigration status. They won't detain suspected illegal aliens at the request of ICE. Mayor Landrieu says these policies make his city safer. On the other hand, crime is surging in New Orleans in the last year, and so the question is it working? Mayor Landrieu joins us now. Mr. Mayor, thanks for coming on.
Hey, Tucker, how are you?
I'm doing great. So I have a lot of friends in New Orleans. Well, thank you. And of course, I know you. All my friends think you're a good mayor. You care about New Orleans. I know it's true. You're a popular mayor. How is this policy, though, helping the people of your city? Exactly.
Well, first of all, you misstated something in the beginning of it. So let me just state this, and I think you and I and everybody can agree that our first order of business is to make sure the people that live in America are safe and secure. And I think that's everybody's priority. And we're trying to figure out a way to get that done. What's interesting about the sanctuary city argument, as you know, is that it's not even a definitive definition in federal law. So it means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Essentially, I want to be really clear about this. Should the New Orleans Police Department arrest anybody for a violent crime, our job, irrespective of immigration status, is to put them in jail and to make sure ICE knows about it so they can come get them and deport them or have them prosecuted here and put in jail. That really has never been a bone of contention for anybody that lives in the city of New Orleans, and for that point of matter, for mayors across America.
The macro question is, why would we be taking crime advice from the mayor of a city that has a real crime problem that appears to be getting a lot worse? And the second question
first of all, that's
hold on. I've got the numbers right here. Your murder rate has almost doubled from January of last year. Your rapes are up almost 100%. In every category, crime has increased about 10% overall. I'm not saying it's your fault. I'm merely saying that clearly these policies that you say will alleviate crime haven't. Moreover, is there any actual evidence, like social science, to prove that your talking point, which I've heard 1,000 times, if we ask people their immigration status, they won't cooperate with the police, we'll have more crime? Where do you get that? I mean, how do you know that's true?
Those are all good questions, so let me respond to them. Yeah. First of all, in the city of New Orleans, from 1996 until today, crime is half what it used to be. As a matter of fact, 2 years ago, we hit our lowest murder rate in 40 years. Now, you are right that in the last year, crime has gone back up. But if you look at it overall, since these policies have gone into place, I'm not saying they caused this crime spike. But wait, let me finish. You said you were going to let me finish. So, secondly, these particular policies have nothing to do with that particular crime, because the people that are committing those crimes are not folks that are here illegally. Now, we do have a challenge throughout all of America on issues of violence that we have really got to get a handle on. But the question gets to be, how do you actually do that, and what's the best way? Now, the answer to your second question is, how do I know this? Is there any empirical data? I rely on my generals in the field. And those guys in the American cities are the major police chiefs across America, along with the major sheriff's association, who always have told us, these are the guys we listen to, said, if you guys make us become a deportation force for ICE, we're going to push all these individuals back in the shadow, and it's going to make it harder for us to solve crimes for everybody, especially if you take money away from us.
I wrote a book on this actually years ago. I've heard this line many, many times, but we study crime. There are armies of criminologists at America's universities, and nobody has shown that your claim is true. That's my only point. We don't actually know that's true. That's the opinion of a lot of people, for sure, including you. Well, but we don't know it. Listen, and by the way, if these policies are meant to make your city safer, why has it become more dangerous? I'm not saying they caused it to be more dangerous.
It's a good question. It's a great question. One of the reasons why cities become unsafe is because, number one, we don't have enough police officers on the street. Number two, we don't invest sufficiently in mental health and substance abuse treatment. Number three, the federal government does not have a direct authority to get the bad guys with guns off the street. It has to be attached to some kind of drug offense. And number four, there isn't enough coordination. If we did the same things we did back in 1996, where we put that crime plan together without the bad parts of the crime bill, you would actually be able to reduce crime on the streets. This is not necessarily, wait, let me finish. This is not necessarily tethered to the issue of immigration. And by the way, if you can find anybody in America in any uniform, well, you asked me a question that intimated that was the answer. But let me just finish this point for you. If you can find anybody in America that has definitively found the answer to young kids killing young kids over inconsequential things, who don't have a job, who don't have an appropriate education. We need to make a huge investment in those kinds of things and not let it get caught up in the issue of immigration. And let me just finish with this. The thing that makes me so sad about this.
As a matter of faith, I noticed from your point of view, maybe they are tied. In some cities, they are tied. In Los Angeles, well, they're directly related to one another. Nobody denies that. That's not always true, as you know.
That's correct. Nothing's always true in all circumstances. Every city is a little bit different, and this is a very complicated problem. But I'll tell you, the answer is not as simple as what's coming out of the White House. And what pains me is I actually think the country is in a moment, just like only Nixon could go to China, maybe only Trump can do immigration reform, where we could actually get this done in a way that was positive for everybody, with everybody making sacrifices. And we just seem to be battling with each other about it.
Well, I think that's a lot of what you say is true. Now, really, just very quickly, in the interest of civil discourse, you issued a press release in which you described the president's ban on immigration temporarily from those 7 countries that I'm quoting as un-American and un-Christian. It sounds like something like the Pope would say. You're a mayor. So, like, do you think about the policies in New Orleans through the lens of whether or not they're Christian, and should you?
Well, let me say this. I'm a person of faith. I was raised in the Catholic faith and the church, and actually I think a lot of what people say in terms of what America's values are really important. And of course, it's not just Christian values, but Judeo-Christian values and other values as well, about whether we ought to be an open group or whether we ought to be closed, whether we ought to reaching out to people or we ought to be able to slap them. I think one of the challenges I have with the president, who I know is trying to do the right thing, is he seems to solve every problem with a battle axe and not with a scalpel. And, we had a couple of difficult 10 days here where a lot of mishaps.
But un-American, un-Christian? I mean, that's not a scalpel either. I mean, it's not defensive Trump, but like, un-American?
No.
Who says that?
Well, first of all, I think that American values support reaching out to people and trying to help them rather than trying to punish them, working through issues. Not saying, for example, I just saw this yesterday at the prayer breakfast that I thought was very interesting.
Sorry, they're telling me the satellite's about to die. Will you just hit me with it? So I'm sorry to do that.
Well, we'll finish another time. I want to come back and talk to you. I think you'd be great, and I'm happy to be here.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great to talk to you.
All right, you guys. See ya.
See ya. Up next, one California politician wants to make illegal Russian hacking in the 2016 election a mandatory subject in school textbooks. He'll tell us about his proposal to do that in just a minute. Well, just 3 weeks ago, a California lawmaker who was upset about November's election wanted to mandate school training in how to spot fake news. Now, a different lawmaker, same state, has his own notions about how to improve education in the wake of Hillary Clinton's defeat. California Assemblyman Mark Levine is crafting a new bill that would require public schools in the state to teach about the subject of Russian hacking and how it supposedly swayed the last U.S. election. Assemblyman Levine joins us from Sacramento. Assemblyman, thanks a lot for joining us.
Thank you, Tucker. Glad to be on tonight.
So I'm reading this and I'm thinking, well, okay, how would you feel if Donald Trump directed the Education Department to withhold funding from any state that refused to add to textbooks the claim that 3 million people voted illegally in the last election? You'd be mad. So it raises the question, why should politicians be involved in crafting textbooks?
To me, the most important thing is that we need to understand our history to have a sense of what foreign policy we have in the future. So looking back decades from now, why are we on the course that we're on? If we look at the War of 1812, the Monroe Doctrine, the Marshall Plan, these are moments in history that really help us understand where American leadership has come from. We need to understand Russian interference in the 2016 election and its impacts on foreign policy to make sure that we have an American century ahead of us like we've had behind us, one where America is in full control of its destiny.
Okay. I mean, I think you're right, actually. But the point is we don't understand the effect of Russia in the election right now. The War of 1812 was 200 years ago. Marshall Plan was 70 years ago. We have a vantage. We get it now. We have perspective. We have no perspective on what happened. And basically what you're suggesting is adding propaganda from a politician into textbooks. And why should I be in favor of that?
Well, the intelligence community had an assessment where they agreed that the Russian government and Vladimir Putin himself had the boldest move ever in their interference in our election. And this will have an impact on American foreign policy. But we have a president who is the least curious man on the planet about this issue. He wants to change the results of the election by saying that he won by a landslide. He wants to change the number of people that went to his inauguration with, numbers that just cannot be substantiated, a loose affinity for the truth. And usually winners write the history books. But we need to make sure that the truth is in our history books, and it's not papered over by the president.
Okay. No, what you're doing is trying to get losers to write the history. Well, look, I just want historians to write the history books. And
That's right. I agree with you.
I do. Who says you're a nice guy. You seem like a reasonable person. I don't want to attack you. But you know as well as I that what you're suggesting is the addition of political propaganda into textbooks. There's nothing to substantiate your claims. We don't know Russia's intent. We don't know the extent to which they influence this election. Those are unknowable right now, and you know that as well as I do.
I agree with the intelligence community's assessment.
Look, their assessment does not say that the outcome of the election was affected by Russian interference. It doesn't say that, and you know it doesn't say that. And they also have no way of knowing the intent because it's unknowable.
They did not assess whether or not their interference had an outcome. They assessed whether or not the Russian government purposely, and Vladimir Putin himself purposely intervened. If I were President Trump, I would condemn that interference, and I would say that they would be held accountable and that their impact would not be on foreign policy other than that. The president has done everything he can to deny it, but when he was confronted with the incontrovertible evidence of the intelligence community's assessment, even he had to agree that they were involved.
So you don't like to look. I know you're from Marin, right? You're from Marin County.
Yeah,
I get it. I lived in California. Like, angry rich people come up to you at parties and say, we got to do something about this Trump character. He's terrible. He's wrecking the guy. I get the pressure that you're under. But I'm just asking you
highly educated and highly engaged
No, when
voters,
you're sipping Chardonnay and Ross, people are hassling you. And I get it completely. But let me just ask you, how would you feel as a parent, and I think you are a parent, if your kids' textbooks had political claims that were not basically substantiated and they were clearly partisan, and they were inserted by some politician you didn't agree with? Wouldn't that enrage you?
So let's get into the weeds on this. Yeah, let's get in the weeds on this. So what would happen is that California has an instructional quality commission that looks at curriculum for the different subjects. They would make an assessment of how to include this. They would then make a recommendation that can be approved and accepted, revised, modified, or even rejected by the State Board of Education. And so that's how curriculum is developed. Politicians will not have a hand in what is written in our history books, and nor should they.
What do you mean? You're writing a bill to require this, so by definition you have a hand in it. But let me just say, without being mean, I love California. It's my home state, multi-generational. But it's like not as nice as it was when I grew up there, and you know that. It's much poorer than it used to be. Got a lot of problems, a lot of uneducated. It's got more poverty than any state in the country, and it's got some of the worst schools in America. And so should you, a smart, capable guy with power, be spending his time trying to appease the angry rich housewives of Ross with nonsense like this, or like improving the state?
Well, you shouldn't talk about your friends like that, but what we do have are excellent schools, the best public universities in the world, the sixth largest economy. We are leading the nation in job creation. Innovation comes from California, but where you live should not define whether or not you will be successful. This socioeconomic challenge, this inequality, is something that is as true in California as it is in Kentucky.
Okay.
We need to do more to fix that.
That's true.
And nationally, we all struggle with this.
So if you're an African-American sixth grader in California, and way less than 50%, I think it's more like 20%, pass the math standards at that age, is learning propaganda about Russian interference in the election, is that really going to make you a better software engineer? Like, this is totally frivolous.
We can learn history, and we can also, as I have since I was elected in 2012, reinvest in education, where I voted to increase spending by $14 billion, but also change the way we spend in education by making sure that the socioeconomic status does not define how much funding goes to your school, that in fact we can direct money to where it's needed to improve outcomes. We have a lot more work to do, but we need to know the truth about American history.
Okay. I don't think I'm convincing you, but you know that I'm right. I know that you do on some level. Assemblyman, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, Tucker.
Up next, President Trump told Bill O'Reilly last night that while Vladimir Putin may be a killer, the U.S. isn't so innocent either. Writer David Horowitz will talk about what that means. He's thought a lot about it. Stay tuned. Well, President Trump's attitude toward Russian President Vladimir Putin is once again causing conniptions in the press and here in Washington. During an interview with Fox's Bill O'Reilly, Trump said this.
Do you respect Putin?
I do respect him.
Do you? Why?
Well, I respect a lot of people, but that doesn't mean I'm going to get along with him. He's a leader of his country. I say it's better to get along with Russia than not. And if Russia helps us in the fight against ISIS, which is a major fight, and Islamic terrorism all over the world,
right,
major fight, that's a good thing. Will I get along with him? I have no idea. It's very
He's a
possible
killer,
I
though.
won't.
Putin's a killer.
A lot of killers. We got a lot of killers. Why, you think our country's so innocent? Do you think our country's so innocent?
I don't know of any government leaders that are killers in America.
Well, take a look at what we've done too. We've made a lot of mistakes. I've been against the war in Iraq from the beginning.
Yeah, mistakes are different
than... A lot of mistakes, okay, but a lot of people were killed. So, a lot of killers around, believe me.
Well, David Horowitz knows something about the Russians. His parents were ardent communists who left the party after learning of Stalin's atrocities. Today, he is the author of Big Agenda, Trump's Plan to Save America, which has been an Amazon bestseller for the past 3 weeks. He joins us now from Los Angeles. David, great to see you. So
good to be on your show, Tucker.
I guess when I watched that, my first thought is, I think, well, I do kind of think America is sort of innocent, actually, certainly compared to Putin's Russia. I'm not particularly anti-Russia, but really?
Well, look, Trump is really a transparent figure, and the idea that he sees a moral equivalence between Russia and the United States is ludicrous. He's a passionate patriot. Do our politicians kill people? Barack Obama killed Gaddafi. Gaddafi was no threat to this country. There was no authorization from the Congress, from the Security Council, from anybody. And Hillary boasted on television with a big smile on her face. We came, we saw, he died.
Yeah.
That's a murder.
Well, Samantha Power thought he was immoral.
Kennedy.
Yeah.
Yeah. John F. Kennedy. The world is full of such leaders. John F. Kennedy murdered the president of South Vietnam, our ally. So it does, it happens. The problem here, or let me say the virtue of Trump, the amazing thing about him, and why, as I show in my book, A Big Agenda, he's transforming the Republican Party and America in the process, is that he doesn't back down. It's kind of like the Bruce Springsteen song, no retreat, baby, no surrender. You saw McConnell and Paul Ryan immediately backing off. You can't back off. Trump has gotten no honeymoon. According to Gallup, the average honeymoon for an incoming president is 7 months. Trump didn't get 7 seconds. It's been a constant war against him.
Well, yeah, a lot of people don't. But tell me, I mean, so you've written a book on this. Of the big agenda that Trump has and seeks to implement, what's the most important thing? What for reforming the Republican Party and for making the country better? What's the number one agenda item?
The most important thing is he's not intimidated. We had a Republican Congress for 6 years with record majorities, and they did nothing. They had come in, pledged to undo Obamacare, to defund his illegal amnesty programs, and they funded them. Why? Because they were scared of being called obstructionists and racists. The seminal moment in the campaign came in the second debate when Trump faced the cameras with Hillary on stage and said, you have to understand, Hillary has tremendous hatred in her heart. So does the Democratic Party have hatred in their hearts for Republicans. And it's all come out now. You just see it every night on TV. Maxine Waters calling for the impeachment of Trump. He hasn't been in office for 2 weeks. But Trump is unintimidated, and people don't realize how important that is in advancing any agenda, because you end up just appeasing the left. So my whole chapter of my book is devoted to who our adversaries are, why the Democratic Party has gone off the left deep end. They're marching over the cliff now. You have to understand that Bernie Sanders would have been the candidate if the corrupt Clintons hadn't fixed the primaries.
I think that's
true. How left the Democratic Party is. And Trump has shown the way to stand up to them. The Democrats have declared war. I wish they would draw back. I wish they would do what Lady Gaga did at the Super Bowl last night. Let's have some unity for a while. Let's be a community for a while. But that's not going to happen. And while that doesn't happen, you need a stand-up guy. And Donald Trump is that guy.
David Horowitz, thanks for joining us. Bestseller for 3 weeks. Appreciate it. Up next, news abuse. Howie Kurtz joins us to showcase the most abhorrent media missteps of the past week. There are many to choose from, but he'll call 3. Stay tuned. Well, it's time for What They Really Think. It's a new segment where we take a look at the semi-private words of our country's premier journalists and see how those words align with their goal of being neutral purveyors of fact. Our first star is Terry Moran. He's chief foreign correspondent for ABC News, whose Twitter feed resembles a DNC press release with added moral outrage. Don't believe us? Here are some examples. Quote, upset Trump didn't destroy ISIS within days of taking office. Moran tweeted this: I thought Trump already had a secret plan to destroy ISIS. What happened to it? After the president's immigration order, Moran wrote, for 70 years and more, American science has triumphed because the USA got the best minds in the world. Now that's at risk. Thanks, Trump. He also said, quote, Trump's NSC chief's son declares exactly what this is, a Muslim ban, whatever weasel words his father and Trump's minions come up with. In another tweet, he simply labeled Trump President Snowflake. Moran was in near religious ecstasy over the Women's March 2 weeks ago, tweeting this: has there ever been a day when so many people in so many places marched in solidarity for a cause? VE Day? This is historic. Moran felt a tingle down his leg when the New York Times announced it had hit 3 million subscribers. He tweeted this: failing? Not. And in response to Trump's comments downplaying the violence of Vladimir Putin's government in Russia, just today, Moran moaned, somewhere Ronald Reagan weeps. And that's